Hello, and welcome to Eloqua Office Hours, our monthly discussion for Eloqua professionals. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded. Tomorrow you'll receive a replay link via email. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature to help us keep organized. A challenge we all face in marketing is email overload. When customers feel bombarded, they often hit unsubscribe instead of adjusting their features. And if the preference center isn't intuitive, they won't bother changing their settings. That creates problems for marketers, such as lost engagement, compliance risks, and messy segmentation. But there's a better way. Today, we'll explore how a modern preference center can solve these challenges. I'm Sebastian Martinez, Account Director at 4 Marketing, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is Mark Lavelle, CEO of 4 Marketing. Mark has over 25 years of experience in Silicon Valley, having founded successful CRM startups and held executive roles in marketing and sales, including at Market to Lead and CDC Software. And with that introduction, let me turn it over to Mark.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Appreciate the introduction there. All right, appreciate you all joining. Today we're going to talk a little bit about 4Preferences. So we've got a sneak peek introduction. This is a product we're pretty excited about and proud of. We've been working on it for a number of years, and it's now being put into use internally, or just about to be put into use internally, and it's not very long before it will be released to the general public. Quick conversation about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about departments and systems and acquisitions. Oh my, why can't I just put up a page? And sort of some of the problems with preference systems as we see them today. We're going to talk a little bit about preference centralization and how having a general central database of preferences is a big advantage for a large corporation. We're going to talk about ease and flexibility, and then we're going to talk about preference segmentation, reporting, and services. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about departments and systems and acquisition. We will be getting into the demo in just a moment, but let's talk about the problem to start with. So as we all know, there's a lot of different departments in our organizations these days. And we have one particular example that I've chosen out of a few here. One is a tech finance company that we've done some preference work for. And this company had a number of different departments, and they wanted a unified preference center. And so one of the things we did is an audit of the entire organization. And we found that sales basically had one preference that they wanted to track, that is whether you could call somebody or not. Marketing had 11 preferences. This is a relatively small number for marketing. When you calculate in a newsletter or two, an event or two, company press releases, and a few products, you can get up to 10 very easily. And I know companies with 3, 4, 5 times that in terms of marketing. In fact, I know one company with, gosh, I think they have over 300 preferences just in marketing. Support. This particular company had 5 support preferences. Support's pretty easy because there's usually an opt-in for service announcements, service newsletters. Sometimes there's a developer channel. Product. 3 preferences this particular company had. They basically wanted to be able to do feature surveys and notify people of new features and new releases. Investors, they had quarterlies and 10Qs and annuals and a couple of other things that they wanted to be able to, lists they want to be able to put people on. And accounting. Now, accounting's kind of a silly one because everybody wants to get invoices and or purchase orders and accounts receivable information and so forth. But what's interesting is in today's world, in some countries, legally you are required to have people opt in or be able to opt out of that stuff. And if that's legally required, it needs to be one of your preferences. So this is a pretty modest preference environment for this particular organization. This was in 2019. 26 preferences for this particular organization. One particular department decided to opt out, and that department was the service department. There was a kind of a big political hullabaloo here about this particular service department, but they eventually decided they were separate from the support department and they wanted to opt out. We told them, hey, you're going to lose re-opt-in opportunities here. If someone comes to the main page and is interested in service, they're not going to be on the big list. If they go to the service department, they're not going to see the rest of things in marketing that they could opt in for. So there's a lot of re-opt-in opportunities that are lost. In some countries, it's illegal to do this, but that was not a winning argument either. And of course, you just generally get better outcomes when people have all the personalization options available. But that was their choice. And so going on from there, again, we had 26 preferences and we went through the implementation process. Implementation process was very successful, but an interesting thing happened when we rolled the environment out. When we rolled it out, we found that we had missed a number of preferences. Sales decided after they saw the system, they saw how well it was working, they had 4 more preferences. Marketing had missed one themselves, which was funny because they were leading the project. Investors had 4 more preferences. These weren't really ones we missed. They were ones that the investor team came up with that they wanted added additional for higher levels of personalization for the investment community. Accounting added 1 more, and we completely missed the biz dev department. So partner biz dev added 9 new preferences to the list. So we jumped from 26 then to 45 preferences. So you can see all the preference numbers sort of updated here. And then, so we now had 45 preferences. And then an interesting, these days, fairly normal sort of thing occurred. An acquisition occurred. And all of those preferences doubled up. And doubled up is really not quite the right word. You know, it wasn't exactly the same, of course. We've doubled it for this slide, but you get the idea. A year and a half later, another one. 2.5 years later, another one. This company then is now up to 376 preferences. So this is kind of the problem that people face here. And this is even talking about starting to talk about channels or frequencies or all of the things that we can multiply these preferences by. This is just the number of preferences that can exist in a large multi-billion-dollar organization. If you can stop and think about all the departments you have and all the different departments that are sending things, you know, it's easy when you're in marketing to just look at marketing. But to legally cover and manage all preferences in the organization, you have to have a much wider visibility, a much broader perspective. So with that, what I'd like to do is start to kind of switch back and forth and pop back and forth to the demo. Before I do that, though, or as I do that, I'd like to talk for just a second about the 4Preferences menus. In fact, I'll switch over to the demo here for just a second and kind of show you those menus. So this is the 4Preferences environment right here. You'll see it's the second option on the menu. We have three first-party data strategic tools. We have 4Comply, which is a privacy compliance system. We have 4Preferences, which is a preference management system. And then we have 4Segments, which is a reporting and segmentation system that comes with either of these systems so that you can utilize and leverage the data that you generate and create in these systems. Because this first-party data is wonderful to have, but if you can't use it for personalization, it's very limiting. So I'm going to pop back to the presentation for just a quick second and talk about the differences between these first two. A lot of people ask the question, okay, what's the difference between compliance and preferences? We've got a first-party data strategy here, but how do these differ? And there's certainly overlap between the two, but they have different objectives, different end goals. So from a compliance perspective, we're really talking about the law. We have to talk about, you know, very specific laws like CCPA and GDPR. We have to talk about data minimization as a requirement, anonymization as a requirement. And so really what compliance is about, and in this case 4Comply, is about following the law. 4Preferences, on the other hand, is about trust. It's about loyalty. It's about giving your users selection and choice and options and notifying them about what they want to get and not bugging them or even bothering them at all, diminishing their trust at all about all the things they don't want to get. So this is really the difference between compliance and preferences. And you know, both of these are essential. We have to follow the law. If not, many of our customers or governments of our customers will force us to. But building client trust is where revenue comes from. It's where business comes from. It's where business starts. So with that said, let's go into the 4Preferences demo and sort of switch over here. So you'll see this 4Comply menu and this 4Segments menu option here, but where we're going to really spend our time today is in 4Preferences. And we'll start off in the reports section on the 4Preferences dashboard. Now, the dashboard's pretty basic and pretty simple. It gives you what your active preference pages are, how many have been submitted. I will mention to everybody that this is a pre-release you're seeing here, so our demo data in this system is pretty minimal. When we get to actual launch and regular sales, we will have this demo database a little more robust in terms of quantity of data and information, but I think you can get the idea from what we're talking about here. So this gives you a perspective of what's going on at a high level overall in your 4Preferences world. You can sort this by different business units. And if you'll remember when we were on the other page, we saw all those different business units that happen through acquisition. Well, something that happens in large organizations is a business unit that happened through an acquisition needs to have its preferences combined with the rest of the organization, but simultaneously needs to be able to work with and just use and see their own preferences. Because if they're all mixed in with the rest of the organization, they can't focus on their business unit. And especially if that business unit has happened because of an acquisition, that's really debilitating. So 4Preferences really allows you to switch between the big picture or just focusing on the business unit that is yours, your particular area. So moving on here, there's a number of other things in the reporting area that I'll come back to. There's the preferences that are set up for individuals. There's a contact preference history, which can be used for some legal history, but of course 4Comply is a lot stronger in that, trapping business purposes and other legal requirements of certain specific laws. You can see the contact details history, but really what I want to jump down to now is the configuration of the system and where we set up the reporting and set up the overall usage of the system. Now, there's a lot of options under here, it looks like, but they're really actually pretty simple. I'm going to start off and just kind of with the bottom here and just mention a few of these. One of these is business units, and business units is really simple. It's just the business units within the organization. You might have one for support, you might have one for investors, you might have a business unit for an acquisition or a different acquisition or combinations of those. And this allows you to sort and create sets of preferences, sets of preference pages that are tied to a specific business unit. We also have a whitelist capability, which increases security of those people that have access to it. We have a full infrastructure and architecture underneath 4Preferences that you can use or have us use for customization and development purposes. It can be used for integration, it can be used for customization. We have webhooks that trigger so that you can start your own code pieces and resume passing that control back to 4Preferences if you want. And then these next three items are really configuration items. These are the various types of fields you can have, like whether you want to have yes or no as a field or country as a field, and you can set these up within the system. Frequencies, this is how frequently or how often you're going to mail things to people, and you can, of course, create your own frequencies here, and these frequencies will all be usable when we start setting up the core preferences in just a second. And we have channels. These are the different ways you can reach out to your people. Now, if we look at channels and we look at the fields plus the core preferences here, we get to really the heart of the 4Preference system. And that is all the preferences that you can have in the system. I'm going to click on it here for just a second. And again, not really a huge database of preferences here. But what I'm going to do for a second here, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to go to, I think I am, in theory, there I am. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And I want to take just a quick second for all of us to think about the various types of and categorizations and subcategorizations that we could have for each preference. So there are obviously communication preferences in general, newsletters, events, product updates. Each of these have sort of categories that can have their own preferences if you want. Promotions, surveys, feedback requests. These can be for product management. These can be for executives who want to see how, what their customers are doing in terms of future direction. Can be marketing CMOs to determine, how things should be positioned. Press releases. One-on-one communications for sales calls. Can sales call people? Are there people that sales can't call? Most companies aren't doing this in the United States these days, but they are doing it in other countries. And then there's a bunch of content categories. So you can have preferences that are categories of things that you would send to people. And I'm not going to read through every one of these. You guys have all seen a million of these. I have no idea why forums is bolded here. I just noticed it's large in my PowerPoint. So guess that one's important for some reason. And then we have frequency and channel preferences. So there's different ways you can communicate to people and different time frames you can communicate with people. So for every single preference in 4Preferences, you can set up how often it's available. So if you come out with a newsletter every month or every week, you could give someone the capability to receive that newsletter weekly or just monthly or maybe just quarterly. And then you can have different communication channels, like obviously email, which is probably the most common, but there's also SMS and texting, which is extremely popular with sports teams and people that are promoting concerts and that sort of a thing. There's social channels. There's like direct messaging on X and LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. There's phone calls and whether phone calls are permitted or not. All of these are different channels. And you can effectively multiply all these different channels and all these different frequencies against all of these different types of preferences. Preferences can also be categorized by language, by region. And there's various options that you can set preferences for as well. So all of these multiplied by all of these considered against all of the different business units and departments you have is how all the preferences actually end up turning into a database of preferences. So this database of preference can be tied to a business unit, so you can look at them just for a particular business unit if you want to, or you can set them up for all business units. There's different types of preferences here. Most of your preferences are going to be single check boxes, but you might have some that you want to have radio buttons or some that you might want to have multiple check boxes or even text boxes. And you can go in and edit these preferences and you can see what it's named, what its type is. You can see here whether it's a required preference or not. In other words, when it goes onto a page, it must be filled out by the user. It's always going to turn red if they don't fill it out and they can't go on. Or you can turn that off. And then here's the various channels. Now, for some preferences, you might only have email. For other preferences, you might let people get that via email or via push or via email or via text message. And then there's frequencies, of course. And then there's an advanced area down here. We can actually put in code to make a preference, do some visual things on the preference page that's custom and unusual, like flash or scroll or various things that might be appropriate in some circumstances. So once you have your database of core preferences, then you can put them onto a preference page. And so here we can go to a preference page. We can see there's 3 here. And a preference page is, if we go back for just a quick second to our PowerPoint, we can imagine a preference page that's just for support. And when you have this preference page that's sometimes required by law that has all 376 preferences that are technically legally required by your organization, this can become overwhelming for the customer. So support wants to have its preference page just for it. The investor preference page, they don't want to put all this other information in. They might want to put product information, but they probably don't want to put support. They probably don't want to put sales and accounting preferences on the investor preference page. So you can create preference pages for each and every department, each and every business unit, and you can then go in and edit these pages. Now, when we edit these pages, it's pretty straightforward. First at the top, we have the page details. This is the name of the page, its URL, short description of it, which business unit it ties to. And then down here, we have the page builder. And the page builder is very simple and very straightforward. Basically, what happens here in the page builder is you've got your preferences listed here. You drag them over onto the page. You can see your pages here. If you want to, you can put in a header or footer or custom CSS or custom scripts. Anytime you want to, you can come up here and click on page preview, and you can see what that page preview looks like. In this case, we're using the Forethought Marketing header. We've got the Forethought Marketing menu up here, and then these preferences are automatically pulling from the preference database and showing up on the page. In this case, we have an email address so someone can look up their preferences. You can choose to have that or not have that as is appropriate. You can see we also have a footer here, and all this is showing up on that automatically created preference page just by dragging the selected preferences we want over. In this case, email plus a couple preferences were here. We can also put custom controls. There's a whole level of customization you can do here so that you can have very complex, very powerful preference pages. So I'm going to go back for a second now to the PowerPoint. And we've kind of seen how we can take all of these business units, all of these departments, all of their individual needs for preferences. We can consider all the channels that some of these preferences might have, the multiple channels that various of these preferences might have, all the different frequencies they might have, and we can see how we can put them on any combination of pages that we want, including on multiple pages. So you will probably want this is all of our preferences page, master preference page capability. And you also might want just a page for support, or maybe just support, like let's say you're General Electric, and you might have a business unit for General Electric jet engines, and you might have something for jet engine support page. But that's probably going to be a very different support preference page than the General Electric washing machine or General Electric home appliances support page. So you can have all these different support pages with whatever combinations, preferences you want. You can have multiple preferences on multiple pages if as appropriate, and all these can be aligned with channels and frequencies. Now, all of this is great, and all of this ability to use preferences is fantastic. To store preferences is fantastic, but what about using that data? One of the big problems we see in today's world, is the ability to leverage the first party data after you've collected it. And so I'm going to jump back over really quick to the system here, and I'm going to close down 4Preferences configuration and mention here two things. First of all, we have multiple reports where you have full history sort of pre-built for you. But something we also have is something called 4 segments. And I already have 4 segments open over here. And 4 segments allows you to create visual segments of all of your first party data, regardless of whether it's out of 4Comply or whether it's out of 4Preferences. And what this means is that you can open up a Venn diagram or a matrix or a waterfall or a funnel or a map, and you can visually see how your data is going to apply. So I can come in here to, for example, my Eloqua system or my Marketo system, and I can look at some aspect of my data. I could look at all my contacts, and I could see in this database I'm working with 3.9 million of them. I could say, okay, that's fine, but what about job function? Let's look at everybody that is in the IT area, and let's look at how IT overlaps with an industry, let's say healthcare, and I can pop over healthcare, and I can say, okay, I've got 256,000 in my IT group, I've got 263,000 in my healthcare group, and I can then see the overlap, and I can see I've got 10,000, 9,558 that are a combination of IT and healthcare. And maybe I want to look at that only in a particular country, just the US, for example. I could drag US over, I could get an even tighter configuration here. I could look at just the overlap of all three of those, which I don't know if that's actually going to be there or not. I don't think it may be. Let me see, zoom in a little bit here. There's actually no overlap of those three. That's actually pretty rare. But I could look at just a healthcare or just one of these segments. And one of the beauties of this is when I'm done, I can take any segment or combinations of segments that I've created, and I can drag that segment over and I can drop it directly into Eloqua, or create a Salesforce list, or a responses campaign, or a Marketo campaign, or an Excel spreadsheet. And when I do that, it'll take those 152,000 records and drop them straight into an Eloqua segment that I can then use, Eloqua list, and use that information directly in Eloqua or one of these other systems. And what this does is it takes your 4Preference data, it takes your compliance data if you're also using our 4Comply product, and it takes all of that data and it makes it easily segmentable and usable for personalization. So, that's a very quick demo of 4 segments, the reporting engine for 4Comply and 4Preferences. And the last thing I'm going to talk about here really quickly is, if I can get to the page, our preference services. Sorry, I'm having slide control problems here. Your preference services. So from a preference service perspective, first of all, we have complete outsourced preference management. In that situation, we will handle it all. We can work with all your different departments in the organization to create your preference pages, put it all together, manage it on an ongoing basis. You really have to do nothing. Or if you want to manage and maintain your own system, we can just help with implementation and maintenance. We can take that, we can import all of your existing preferences, pull in from all those different systems and all those different spreadsheets. We can consider and incorporate all of your needs. And finally, we can do integrations. We can connect up 4Preferences to your CRM system, your marketing automation system, and we can make it so that these personalized segments, like you just saw me create a moment ago, flow into or are easily usable in your other systems, like your marketing automation and your CRM systems. So this is an overview of the services that we combine with 4Preferences. And of course, we have privacy compliance, segmentation services, and other first-party data strategy services that can really coalesce your first-party data strategy as an organization and a corporation. So with that said, I'm going to turn this back over to Sebastian Martinez. We're going to see if there are any questions. And with that, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Mark. It was a wonderful demo, and we actually do have a few questions. So this one just came in. It's a good question. Mark, so 4Segments is not available on its own without preferences or compliance?
No, in fact, where's my video? No, in fact, 4Segments is definitely available without those products. It comes on a limited to the data of 4Preferences and 4Comply. It comes with those systems free of charge, but it comes limited to the data in those systems. If you want to use it with all of your data, it is also available as a separate product. Usually, since we don't have audio here, I can't ask whether that answers your question. If that doesn't answer your question, ask another one. Any more questions?
I see a thumbs up. So
Oh, good.
we're good.
Thank you.
Okay, here's another one. How would you manage preferences between two different business units where there are two separate instances of Eloqua? I'd imagine you want to sync the subscription preferences between systems, but how would you determine which system gets to overwrite the other?
Great question. So first of all, the answer is as often in the case in these sorts of situations, it depends. I would sort of go through three approaches. The first approach and the most commonly used is if it's different business units, they're probably different preferences. So the preferences for, well, like I said, the GE jet engine unit will probably be different than the preferences for the GE washing machine unit. And so there is no issue of overlap. That's answer number one. Answer number two is when you have preferences for a particular landing page, like you have landing page preferences that are feeding in, but they're not opt-out. Typically, those will be opt-in preferences, but not opt-out. So when somebody gets that page, if they check the checkbox, they get opt-into the washing machine newsletter or the home appliance newsletter, but they don't get opted out. And so if you have two preferences from two different business units that conflict, the landing page opt-outs will not affect each other, but the ins, the checks, the turns on will turn them both on. And then if somebody wants to turn off their preferences, they have to go to the master preference page for either that business unit or for the entire corporation. Give me a thumbs up if that answers your question. Next question.
I've got one last question here. How can companies use preference data to personalize beyond just sending them the right thing?
Actually, that's really a great question because most companies think of preferences as only usable for what you just said, sending them the right thing, sending them or not sending them the newsletter. But when you have preferences for particular products, and you compare that against products that customers don't have, all of a sudden you get opportunities that you didn't that exist in your system, that exist in the world that you didn't know existed. So that's sort of one example of how preference data can be used for larger segmentation and more tighter personalization. And of course, with 4Segments, you can zero down using those Venn diagrams and using those matrix diagrams and using those maps to narrow exactly into very highly personalized subsegments where you can deliver really tight messages to folks that includes data that you otherwise wouldn't know if people hadn't set those preferences.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So We don't have any further questions. However, I'm going to pause for a few seconds just to see if there are any additional questions coming in. Okay, seems like that's all the questions we have for today.